My name is Ethan Cross. For 12 years, I worked as a commercial deep-sea saturation welder for the Pacific Oil Corporation. Our operating base was Drill Station Echo, anchored 40 miles off the coast of Alaska. We were working at a depth of 7,000 feet, where the water pressure is enough to crush a steel tank. The world down there is completely dead pitch black and colder than a meat locker. Officially, our team was clearing heavy structural debris around the primary thermal vents. But on the morning of October 14, 2025, our sonar arrays registered an anomaly. A massive geometric metallic signature buried 40 feet beneath the ocean floor silt. It wasn't a sunken cargo ship or a lost military submarine. The structural layout showed a perfect concrete dome over 200 feet wide, a subsurface military bunker from the early Cold War era, built using classified technology. The records showed that no country had ever registered a construction permit for this sector. I was ordered to code 0 deep dive to inspect the outer perimeter seals with my heavy diving suit. The atmospheric pressure inside my rigid hard hat suit was stabilized, but my hands were shaking. The high-intensity halogen lights on my shoulders cut through the thick, dark green water. The moment my boots touched the top of the concrete dome, a sharp, low-frequency vibration hit my teeth. It wasn't the sound of the ocean currents or tectonic shifting. The concrete structure was emitting a steady, rhythmic acoustic signal that bypassed my radio receiver. A low mechanical hum that felt like a giant industrial heart beating inside the rock. I walked toward the central atmospheric airlock hatch located at the apex of the structure. The steel of the hatch was covered in a heavy pattern of dark bioluminescent deep-sea moss, and etched directly into the frozen metal plate was a single warning inscription in English. The text read Project Deep Sleep Station 9. I connected my tactical diagnostic tool to the backup emergency power interface of the airlock. The digital screen on my wrist terminal flickered once, then initialized with a retro-green interface. The automated system didn't show a mechanical failure or a structural breach. The internal database was actively running an encrypted high-frequency audio broadcast. I adjusted my internal helmet audio filters to clear the heavy sub-bass static from the channel. The radio speaker element inside my suit didn't burst into life with military codes or static noise. A soft, clear, calm voice of an old woman came through the encrypted agency channel. She was reading a classic children's fairy tale about a boy who went to sleep inside a mountain. A recording that had been looping in total darkness 7,000 feet below the surface for 60 years. Then the heavy pneumatic locks of the concrete hatch clicked, spinning counter-clockwise on their own. The dark water around my visor began to boil with millions of freezing air bubbles rising from below. Because the station wasn't abandoned, the seals were perfect, and the air inside was completely dry, and the voice on the radio suddenly stopped the fairy tale mid-sentence to speak my full name. The heavy pneumatic hatch swung upward into the dark with a violent metallic hiss. The massive weight of the ocean water didn't flood into the open concrete shaft. A powerful invisible electromagnetic repelling field was holding the water barrier exactly at the rim. I forced my heavy, rigid diving suit forward, stepping across the threshold into the airlock chamber. The moment my boots touched the interior floor, the upper hatch slammed shut with a deafening thud. The water inside the small room was sucked out through the floor grates in less than 3 seconds. leaving my suit standing in an environment that was completely dry and freezing cold. My external atmospheric sensors indicated the air quality inside the bunker was 98% nitrogen, an atmosphere designed to preserve biological tissue and mechanical components from organic decay. I manually unlocked the heavy fiberglass faceplate of my helmet, taking a slow, shallow breath. The air smelled heavily of old cardboard, dust, dry paper, and ancient electrical insulation grease. The emergency lighting system of the main corridor clicked on row by row, layer by layer, emitting a dim, pale yellow illumination that looked like an old hospital hallway from 1965. I walked down the long concrete corridor, my footsteps creating a sharp, ringing echo in the dead silence. The walls were lined with thousands of small brass storage lockers, sealed with mechanical combination locks. Every single locker had a small plastic label tape attached to the center of the metal door. The labels didn't contain serial numbers or military cargo codes. They contained the full names, dates of birth, and social security numbers of thousands of citizens, all of them listed as missing persons in the United States between 1960 and 1968. I reached out my bare hand to touch the metal surface of the nearest locker marked David Vance. The brass plate was so cold, it felt like solid, dry ice, stinging my skin with a sharp, burning pain. Then the retro horn speaker on the ceiling directly above my head emitted a loud electronic click. The voice of the old woman returned to the channel, but she wasn't reading the fairy tale anymore. Her tone was flat, completely mechanical, and stripped of all human emotion. The speaker said, "Subject Ethan Cross has entered the primary isolation perimeter of Sector 9. The baseline neural frequency of the asset is now aligned with the central mainframe core. Commence the initialization of the primary dream sequence for the observer." I ran toward the end of the hallway, slamming my back against a heavy steel security door. Through the small, thick glass viewing window of the door, I looked into the central control hub. The room was filled with hundreds of retro mainframe computer towers spinning large magnetic tape reels. And in the center of the room, suspended in a massive glass cylinder filled with thick violet oil, a human body was floating weightlessly with thousands of silver wires attached directly to the skull. The body belonged to an 8-year-old boy wearing a vintage 1960s school uniform. His eyes were wide open, staring through the violet fluid straight at my face. And inside my own skull, my childhood memories began to flicker and shift like old photographs. The boy inside the violet fluid didn't blink his eyes. His pupils were completely static, like 2 small drops of dark oil frozen in ice. The thousands of silver wires attached to his skull were vibrating in a fast rhythmic pattern, creating tiny spirals of silver bubbles that rose to the surface of the glass cylinder. I backed away from the viewing window, my breath coming in short, rapid gasps of freezing nitrogen. My handheld data terminal began to beep violently as a new data packet opened on the screen. The system logs showed that this facility was built under the classification Project Deep Sleep. In 1964, the military realized that the human mind during deep sleep creates a unique wave. A wave that can bend the local structure of space and time if multiplied by a powerful magnetic field. They harvested thousands of children from across the country who possessed this specific neural anomaly. They put them into a state of permanent artificial sleep inside these deep ocean concrete domes. The children weren't test subjects. They were the literal engine that kept the sector stable. Their collective dreams were creating a massive invisible shield over the Pacific floor, a shield that prevented something ancient and miles wide beneath the crust from waking up. I checked the active diagnostic monitor of the central glass cylinder on the desk terminal. The digital readout showed that the boy inside the violet oil was listed as Subject 01. His real name on the screen read Ethan Cross, born August 12, 1956. I stared at the green glowing text, my mind completely freezing with a wave of absolute terror. My own name, my own date of birth, my own identity was displayed on a 60-year-old military file. I reached down to touch my own neck, feeling the thick, rough skin beneath my diving collar. My fingers brushed against a long, deep surgical scar at the base of my skull bone, a scar that I had never noticed in my entire adult life until this exact second. The retro horn speaker on the wall hummed with a sudden burst of high-frequency static electricity. The old woman's voice returned, but it was no longer coming from the ceiling speaker alone. The sound was echoing directly inside my own ears, whispering from the deep corners of my mind. The voice said, "The observer has documented his own primary containment capsule. The extraction of the outer memory shell is now complete. Prepare the asset for the secondary rotation of the dream cycle." The heavy steel security door behind me unlocked with a loud hydraulic hiss, swinging wide open. The violet oil inside the cylinder began to drain away rapidly into the floor pipes, and the floating boy slowly dropped to the bottom of the glass cell, turning his head toward me. The boy inside the glass cylinder stood up on his feet. His limbs were moving with a strange mechanical precision, like an old wind-up doll. The silver wires on his skull remained connected, stretching out like a dark metallic spider web. He pressed his small palms against the thick glass wall of his empty cell. His skin didn't look organic. It looked like polished white porcelain under the pale yellow light. I tried to step backward into the corridor, but my heavy diving boots felt welded to the floor. The concrete beneath my feet was changing its texture, turning soft and damp like wet sand. The rows of brass lockers along the walls began to vibrate with a high-frequency hum. The metal doors popped open one by one, row by row, layer by layer. Thousands of white paper files and old photographs exploded out into the corridor air. They didn't fall down to the ground. They floated in the airless room, spinning slowly. I saw pictures of my childhood house in Ohio, pictures of my mother and my school friends. But every single face in those photographs had been neatly cut out with a sharp blade, leaving only black, empty shapes where the human expressions used to be. The boy opened his jaw wide, but no words came out of his porcelain lips. Instead, a loud, high-pitched radio signal blasted directly through my tactical headset. It was the sound of a modern digital modem trying to connect to an ancient analog frequency. The text on my handheld monitor terminal began to rewrite itself at a terrifying speed. The screen read, "The primary anchor has realized the repetition. The temporal area is nitrogen monoxide, longer compatible with the truth. Prepare to erase the logistics interface, Ethan Cross." I felt a sharp burning heat at the base of my skull where the old surgical scar was. My adult memories of working for the Pacific Oil Corporation began to melt away like wax. The oil rigs, my welding tools, my bank account, my 12 years at sea, everything was static. I realized the oil company was a simulated cover story injected into my brain cells, a false narrative designed to keep my mind calm while my real body lay in the dark. The concrete walls of the bunker began to crack open, revealing the true environment outside. The ocean wasn't there, and there was no water 7,000 feet below the surface. Through the wide fissures in the concrete, I saw an endless black space filled with stars. A cosmic void beneath the Earth's crust that had been hidden by our collective dreams. And the boy inside the glass cell whispered with my own childhood voice, "Ethan, we have to wake up now or the machine will delete our mother." The boy inside the glass cell raised his hand toward the viewport. The porcelain skin on his arm began to fracture into long black lines. The silver wires on his skull tightened, pulling his head backward with an immense force. I forced my arms to move, reaching for the heavy steel welding wrench on my utility belt. The metal tool felt cold and heavy in my gloved hand like a block of solid lead. I swung the iron wrench with all my strength, hitting the thick glass window of the cylinder. The glass didn't shatter into tiny pieces. It cracked with the deep, resonant sound of a church bell. Bright violet electrical sparks exploded from the impact point, blinding my vision for a split second. The radio signal inside my headset screamed with a high-frequency feedback loop. The text on my wrist monitor changed colors, flashing from green to an intense, solid red. The screen read, "Critical stability failure in Sector 9. The engine is experiencing neural resistance. Execute the purge protocol for the entire cluster." The concrete ceiling above my head began to dissolve, turning into a thick, dark liquid oil. The black liquid was dripping down onto the retro computer towers, short-circuiting the tape reels. The magnetic tapes melted into long, sticky black strings that smelled of burnt plastic and sulfur. Through the growing gaps in the structure, the cosmic void outside was expanding rapidly. I saw huge geometric structures made of dark matter and violet neon lines spinning silently in the dark. They were the literal gears of the sub-oceanic machine that had managed my existence for 60 years. The old woman's voice returned to the horn speaker, but her speed was now doubled. She sounded like a damaged text-to-speech software running out of power source. The speaker said, "The memory core has been contaminated by the physical presence of the older asset. The timeline of the 1964 experiment is now deemed completely unstable. Reset the parameter fields and delete the childhood data packet." I swung the iron wrench a second time, hitting the cracked glass wall with my full weight. The entire cylinder burst open, releasing a wave of hot violet gas that smelled of old copper. The boy fell forward into my arms, his porcelain body feeling light and completely hollow. And as his head touched my shoulder suit, the base of my skull exploded with a blinding white pain. The blinding white pain inside my skull vanished into absolute silence. I opened my eyes and realized I was no longer standing in the dry concrete bunker. I was floating weightlessly inside a vast ocean of thick, warm violet fluid. My heavy diving suit was gone, my welding tools were gone, my boots were gone. I was suspended in the center of an endless geometric grid of glass cylinders. Thousands of capsules stretched out into the distance, row by row, layer by layer. And inside every single cylinder lay a human being in a state of deep sleep. I saw old men, young women, military officers, and children from the 1960s. All of them had the same dark silver wires growing out from the base of their skulls. The wires were woven into a massive biological cable that ran down into the black abyss. The retro horn speaker didn't exist in this place, but the voice returned anyway. It was vibrating directly inside the water particles connecting to my eardrums. The voice said, "Welcome back to the primary processing matrix, Ethan Cross. The simulation of the Alaska oil platform has been successfully terminated. The asset has completed 12,000 cycles of the maintenance routine. Now prepare your consciousness for the final formatting sequence of the core." I looked down through the violet fluid into the deep, pitch-black chasm below the grid. A massive circular shadow miles wide was slowly turning in the dark water. It looked like a giant mechanical record disc made of polished black obsidian stone. And etched into the stone were millions of glowing violet lines of human code. Every time a person inside the grid had a dream, the disk would read the data packet, using the human imagination to rebuild the surface world frame by frame, second by second. The cities, the roads, the history books, the oceans, everything was just a data stream. A projection created by thousands of sleeping children trapped 7,000 feet below. I reached out my hand toward the nearest capsule, floating next to my position. Inside the glass cell, a woman was sleeping, her fingers moving in an inverted sequence. She was typing an invisible letter on a keyboard that didn't exist in her reality. The text on her capsule monitor read Subject 349, Memory Class Berlin. I realized the terrifying truth about the entire global infrastructure of our planet. The Cold War never ended, the modern world never happened, and the surface was empty. We were just the organic components of a deep-sea mainframe processor, and my 12 years of welding were just a defragmentation script for the database. The giant obsidian disk below my feet began to rotate faster now. The violet lines of human code on its surface blurred into a single bright neon spiral. A deep sub-bass vibration rose from the abyss, rattling the fluid inside my lungs. The thousands of glass capsules around me started to change their positions in the grid. They were sliding backward out of their slots, like old files being archived in a database. The voice inside the water grew louder, its mechanical tone splitting into multiple layers. The voice said, "The older asset has rejected the primary defragmentation script. The containment matrix is now experiencing an illegal memory access violation. Initialize the total system formatting sequence for the Pacific sector." I felt a cold pressure behind my eyes, like my visual cortex was being erased. The images of my mother, my childhood home, and my years on the oil rig began to flicker. They were turning into gray blocks of digital noise and corrupted tracking lines. I knew if I lost those data packets, my mind would become a blank, unwritten reel. I forced my weight forward through the thick violet fluid toward the main biological cable. The massive bundle of dark silver wires was pulsing with a bright purple illumination. Every pulse represented the collective thoughts and dreams of thousands of sleeping people. I reached out my bare hands and grabbed the thick wire cluster with all my remaining strength. The moment my skin touched the metal, a massive electrical current threw my mind into a panic. I didn't see the underwater matrix anymore. I saw a flash of a military command bunker in Washington, D.C. in 1964. A group of generals was standing around a large analog terminal, watching a map of the ocean. A red light was blinking off the coast of Alaska, marking the location of Project Deep Sleep. An old technician turned his head toward the commander, his face pale and sweating. He said, "Sir, the children are starting to dream about the same empty man in the dark. Their neural waves are beginning to synchronize, and the surface world is starting to blur. We need to inject a new logic script into their minds before the projection collapses completely." The memory snapped back into the violet fluid as the thick cable began to tear in my grip. The silver wires were snapping one by one, releasing bright white sparks into the dark water, and the giant obsidian disc below stopped its rotation mid-track with a violent metallic scream. The massive biological cable split open completely inside my hands. The dark silver wires whipped through the violet fluid like angry metallic snakes. A bright, blinding flash of thermal energy illuminated the entire underwater chasm. The thousands of glass capsules around me lost their stable geometric configuration. They began to drift randomly through the water, crashing into each other with heavy thuds. The sleeping people inside the cells started to move their fingers and open their eyelids. Their eyes were completely vacant, glowing with a dim violet light from the internal system voltage. The old woman's voice inside the fluid began to break apart into fragmented audio phonemes. The sound was distorted, slowing down and speeding up in an unnatural mechanical rhythm. The speaker said, "The primary data track has suffered a fatal hardware laceration. The projection of the surface elements is now experiencing a permanent rendering error. All assets must immediately prepare for the black screen transition." I felt my physical weight returning to my limbs with a sudden violent force. The warm violet fluid around me began to drain away rapidly into the open floor vents. The air returned to the chamber, but it wasn't the fresh nitrogen of the simulation. It was a cold, heavy, damp air that smelled of old rust, sea salt, and rotting organic seaweed. I dropped down onto the cold, hard steel floor of a massive, abandoned industrial hall. My body was shivering, my skin covered in a thick layer of sticky silver residue oil. I looked around and realized the entire geometric grid of cylinders was gone. I was standing inside the real physical ruins of Deep Sleep Station 9. The facility was covered in decades of deep-sea corrosion rust and dark ocean silt. The retro-computer towers were completely dead, their magnetic tape reels broken and unspooled. The giant obsidian disc below the floor plates was no longer a glowing cosmic machine. It was just a massive circular slab of cold, cracked black stone covered in dead moss. The system had not just crashed, it had run out of power source completely. Then I heard a sound from the dark corner of the ruined industrial hall. A slow, steady, heavy footsteps echoing across the wet steel plates toward my location. It wasn't the mechanical, dull steps of the porcelain boy or the voice of the old woman. Someone was dragging a heavy piece of iron metal across the floor, creating a sharp scraping noise, and a single pale white spotlight clicked on from the ceiling, illuminating the corridor path. The scraping sound of the iron metal against the floor plates stopped abruptly. The pale white spotlight on the ceiling flickered twice, then stayed solid green. I raised my hands to shield my eyes from the sudden, intense glare of the light. A figure stepped out from the heavy shadows of the ruined industrial hall. It was an old man wearing a shredded gray technician uniform from 1964. His hair was long and white, his skin completely pale and transparent like paper. But his face looked terrifyingly familiar to me as he stepped closer into the light ring. He had the exact same facial structure, the same nose, the same shape of the jaw. He was an older version of myself, an older copy of Ethan Cross from a previous cycle. His eyes were wide open, staring at me with a mix of deep exhaustion and madness. He dropped the heavy iron wrench from his hand at hitting the steel floor with a loud clang. He looked at my face and his voice came out dry, raspy, and completely broken by years of isolation. He said, "You finally did it. You broke the primary biological cable in the matrix. You thought you were saving the children. You thought you were escaping the simulation. But you didn't look at the external sensors of the station before you pulled the wires. There is no surface world to go back to Ethan. There never was a modern era. The experiment in 1964 wasn't a test, it was a survival vault. The planet above us died 60 years ago from a total atmospheric collapse. We built this deep ocean dome to dream a new reality into existence because the old one was gone. The children weren't prisoners, they were the last organic architects of our species. Every city you remembered, every person you met was a line of text in their collective dream. Now the cable is torn, the disk is dead, and the projection is losing its stability frames. I checked the manual diagnostic radar screen on the wall behind the old man's shoulder. The digital telemetry data was completely static, displaying a row of black zeros. The internal atmospheric pressure of the entire station was dropping rapidly toward 0 bars. The thick concrete walls of the dome were beginning to groan under the massive weight of the ocean. And from the dark corners of the ceiling, the Black Sea water was starting to spray inside the room. The reality was deleting itself row by row, layer by layer, leaving only the cold, empty dark. The heavy concrete ceiling of Sector 9 cracked open with a sound like a thunderbolt. A massive wall of black, freezing ocean water blasted through the central control room. The old copy of myself didn't run, he didn't scream, he didn't try to find an exit door. He stood perfectly still in the center of the light ring, his arms spread wide open. The violent current swallowed his fragile paper body, instantly washing him into the dark void. I felt the freezing pressure of the Pacific water hitting my chest, knocking me to the ground. The salt water filled my throat, my lungs burning my chest with an intense, suffocating pain. I closed my eyes, preparing for the final cold darkness of a deep sea death. But the physical impact of the water vanished as fast as it had arrived. My boots weren't resting on wet steel plates anymore. They were touching a soft, dry surface. The smell of rust and decaying seaweed disappeared, replaced by an absolute lack of information. I opened my eyes and found myself standing on an endless, flat, gray plain made of fine sand. The sky above me wasn't blue, it wasn't black, it was a uniform, dull, electronic gray color. There was no sun, no stars, no horizon lines, no signs of human civilization anywhere in sight. And stretching across the entire sky from one end to the other was a colossal black magnetic tape. The long, dark ribbon, miles wide, was moving slowly from left to right in absolute spine-chilling silence, passing through a giant, rusted, metallic recording head that hovered motionless above the desert. The tape was completely empty, its glossy surface reflecting only the dull gray light of the sky. I looked down at my own body and realized I was wearing a simple white hospital gown. The thick, heavy diving suit was gone, the welding tools were gone, the scars were gone. I turned around to look for the station or the ocean, but there was only the gray sand. and standing across the plain in perfect straight rows were thousands of other people. The children from the 1960s, the women, the military officers, the entire grid population. All of them were standing motionless, their heads tilted backward, staring up at the moving tape. Their eyes were completely blank, wiped clean of all human memory and identity traits. I walked toward the nearest child, a young boy who looked exactly like Subject 01. I touched his shoulder, but his body felt rigid, like a hollow piece of cold porcelain stone. He didn't turn his head. He didn't acknowledge my presence. He didn't blink his empty eyes. Then the giant metallic recording head in the sky emitted a single low-frequency sound wave. A wave that vibrated through the gray sand beneath my bare feet, moving my bones. And inside my empty skull, the voice of the old woman whispered a final permanent line of code. The voice said, "The dream of the Pacific sector has been successfully formatted from the system files. The asset Ethan Cross has been returned to the unwritten database pool. Thank you for participating in the maintenance of the surface narrative. Now clear your internal drive and welcome the next loop sequence."